Oh wait, what am I? Did I? Okay. How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying the fine test of 79 of Masechet Nedarim, friends. That's good. Friends, we're talking about yanking chains today. And we're going to wrap up the 10th parak of Masechet Nedarim, and we're going to move on to the 11th and final parak of Masechet Nedarim, and we're going to talk about Nedarim and being made for Nedarim. All right. So let's do this. We're going to start on Ayin Chesem Beis, about 5-6 lines into the page. Omer Reb Chanina says, Reb Chanina Ashosek Amanas Lemekat Mefer Afil Mikan Vad Yud Yomim. Says Reb Chanina that, if a fellow's wife says she's not going to eat pizza, and then he keeps quiet. Now, if he keeps quiet, so then Memela at the end of the day, if he didn't say anything, so then it becomes a proper neder, she can't eat pizza. But what if he was doing it just to yank her chain? He was keeping quiet. No, he intended he's going to be made for the neder, fine, but he's just yanking her chain. He's not saying anything. He wants to yank her chain. So says Reb Chanina, okay, then he can. So then even if he doesn't, even if he's not made for the neder that day, he can do it later. It says up to 10 days. I wonder if that's like an exaggeration, meaning, right? He can always do it later because he's just yanking her chain. Mosiv Rava Asakasha. A Moshe Amru Meisabal Misrokna Rishus Lav. When do we say that if the husband dies when they're engaged, the fiance dies, so then the father can be made for the Nedarim on his own? Bizman Shelo Shama Abal, as long as the husband did not hear about the neder before he died. Or he heard about it and he was made for the neder before he died. Or if he heard about it and he kept quiet, but he died before the end of the day. But if you heard about the vow and he was Mekayim the vow, or if you heard about the vow and he kept quiet and died the next day, which means that Mimele, he wasn't made for it the previous day, well then the father would be unable to be made for the Nedarim on his own. And let's say that would even be if the fellow kept quiet because he was yanking her chain. Still, if he kept quiet, even if he's just yanking her chain, so then if he dies the next day, the father would be unable to be made for the neder. No, it's talking about when he kept quiet so that he could be mekayim the neder. But we already said that if he heard it and was mekayim it, so then the father can't be made for the nedarim. El b'shosek time. Okay, so say it's talking about if he kept quiet, not with the intention of being mekayim it, but just stop. He kept quiet, without whatever. You heard that she's not going to eat pizza, and he kept quiet, whatever, without any specific intention. So in that case, if he dies, so then the father. Right, I mean he kept quiet without any specific intention, died the next day, so the father would be unable to be made for her nedarim. But if he kept quiet just because he was yanking her chain, and then she dies the next day, so then the father would be able to be made for the nedarim. So we want to argue. Masiv Rav Chizda says, Rav Chizda asakasha, chomer behekim mi behefer uvehefer mi behekim, that there are stringencies in some ways. Being made, right? The husband being making the neder is more stringent than being made for the neder, and in other ways, being made for the neder is more stringent than being making the neder, makayim the neder, making the neder. Chomer behekim, so being making the neder is more stringent than being made for the neder. Shashtika mikayemes, vein shtika mivateles. Because keeping quiet, you could be mekayim a neder by keeping quiet, right? She says, I'm not eating pizza, and he keeps quiet with the intention of being mekayim the neder, so it's mekuyim. Vein shtika mivatelos. But he can't say to himself, he can't, keep quiet and think to himself, I don't know about this. Not eating pizza, I don't know. I don't know. I'm being made for that neder. But if he doesn't say anything, it won't work. Kiyim belibo kayim. If in his heart he's mekayim it, so then it's mekuyim. Hefer belibo eno mufer, but if he's mefer it in his heart, it doesn't work. Kiyim in ein yachol lahafer, hafer ein yachol lekayim. If now we say separately, if he's mekayim a neder, she says he's not going to eat pizza. He says, all right, don't eat pizza. So ein yachol lahafer, he can't change his mind and say, actually, no, I want you eating pizza. Hefer ein yachol lekayim, and if he's made for the neder, he can't then be mekayim it. Katoni she'ashtika mekayemes. No, so we had said that keeping quiet is mekayim a neder. My love, b'shosek amanas lemekat. And let's say that that's talking about even if he keeps quiet with the intention of yanking her chain only, still it's mekayim the neder. Lo b'shosek amanas lekayim. No, if he keeps quiet with the intention of being mekayim the neder, hanukim belibo kayim. Isn't that the same thing as if he's mekayim the neder in his heart? So b'shosek stam. So rather that but shtika mekayemes is talking about shosek stam, right? So meaning if he keeps quiet stam without dafka the intention of being mekayim, but at the end of the day, when it comes nighttime, it'll be mekuyim. Or if he's mekayim it belibo in his heart, he's mekayim the neder. So oichit, it'll be mekuyim. Fine. Okay, fine. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean that but we could still argue that if you kept quiet just to yank her chain, so then it wouldn't be mekuyim. Okay, ashkechan chomer behekim mi behefer. Okay, so we explained why hekim would be more stringent than hefer because he could be mekayim even belibo. Behefer mi behekim inolan. How do we know? Right, in what way is being made for another more stringent than being mekayim another? Rabbi Yochanan nishalin al ahekim ve'nishalin al ahefer. Well, because you can always do a ataris nedarim for a neder that you were mekayim, but you cannot do ataris nedarim for a you can't do anything about a neder that you were made for. Most of Kahana asked Akasha against saying that yanking the chain doesn't count. The pasuk says that if he keeps quiet, it says hachrish yachrish, and then later on in the pasuk it says ki hechrish lo biyom shamos. So it says in that pasuk talking about him keeping quiet 3 times. B'shosek amanas lemekat akosu medaber. So let's say that's talking about that even if he keeps quiet with the intention of yanking her chain, still it would be mekuyim. But 1 second. Maybe it's not talking about shos. Maybe it's not talking about yanking the chain. Maybe we're saying that it's only mekuyim if he has in mind to be mekayim it by keeping quiet. We say, yeah, but when the pasuk says later on, that's talking about shosek amanas lekayim. So what is the first part of the pasuk that says when the first part that says what's that talking about? So it's talking about shosek amanas lemekat. Let's say, and we're saying that even if he's doing it just to yank her chain, still it would be mekuyim. Tiyuvta, so that's a kasha. V'lukim ha b'shosek amanas l'kaim or b'shosek stam. But why don't we say that later on in the pasuk we're talking about shosek amanas l'kaim. The first part of the pasuk is talking about shosek stam, but shosek amanas l'yanka chain would maybe it wouldn't be mekayim the neder. Kroy yisei ksivi. Yeah, but there's 3, right? It says it 3 times. It says hachrish, yachrish, and later on it says ki hechrish labiyom shom. It says 3 times. One's talking about shosek stam, one's talking about shosek amanas l'kaim, the other one's talking about shosek amanas leyanka chain. Fine. And we're saying that it's mekayim the neder. Masiv Rave piles on another kasha. Nadra im chashecha. We said in our Mishnah that if she makes a neder close to nightfall, mefer la'ad shelo chashecha, so Yidavka only has until the nightfall to be made for the neder. Shim lo hefer v'chashchen yachol lahafer, that if it becomes nighttime and it wasn't yet made for the neder, so then he won't be able to make for the neder anymore. Why don't we just say that it's like the yanking the chain situation where you could be made for the neder even later? Tiyuvta. So we see it's also from the fact that yanking the chain is not an option, means that it isn't an option. You can't just yank a chain and be made for later. And finally, if a fellow says, look, I knew that there's a concept of a neder, but I didn't realize that I could be made for a neder. Yofer. So you can be made for the neder even later if you didn't know that there was such an option to be made for a neder. But if a fellow says, I know that it's possible to be made for a neder, but I didn't realize that this was a neder, Reb Meir Omer lo yafer. Reb Meir says that you can't be mefer in that case, right? If you didn't realize that this was a neder, you can't be mefer. V'chacham Omer, the chacham say yafer, you can be mefer. Why don't we say that if you didn't realize that it was a neder, at least say that it's like he was yanking your chain, right? And then he, intended to be mefer it. Why don't we just say that if you forget, it's like yanking the chain, and therefore you can do it later? I'm sorry, why don't we say that if you didn't realize that it was a neder, so at least why don't we make it like yanking a chain and say you can do it later? Tiyufta, from the fact that that's not an option, it means that you can't just pull out the yanking a chain card in order to be able to be made for a neder later on. Alright. Well, that was Hadron Oloch Nari Marasa, that was Perek Nari Marasa. Friends, moving on to the 11th and final Perek of Masechta Nedarim. Nedarim Shu Mefer. These are the following vows that a fellow can be mefer. Devarim sheish bohen inu nefesh. Things that have affliction of the soul. Affliction of the soul. Friends, what afflicts your soul? Im erchatz v'im lo erchatz. If I'm going to bathe or if I'm not going to bathe. Im eskashet v'im lo eskashet. If I'm going to put on makeup or if I'm not going to put on makeup. Amar Rav Yossi says, Rav Yossi, ein elu nidre inu nefesh. No. These aren't afflictions of the soul. These are afflictions of the soul. If she says that I'm not going to eat any fruits. Now friends, let me tell you. I live in Eretz Yisrael. The fruits of Eretz Yisrael, let me give you an update, friends. If anybody lives in Eretz Yisrael or is coming to Eretz Yisrael and is going to be in Shuk Machne Yehuda, let me tell you. Do yourself a favor. Buy yourself a grapefruit. I'm telling you, trust me, it's going to change your life. And she says she's not going to eat any fruits. Wow. How is the Yachal offers? It could be made for the neder because it's going to afflict her soul. Peres Medina zo Allah yavila Medina sacheres. Now, if she says, look, I'm just not going to eat the fruits from a specific place, so then okay, let him bring the fruits from a specific place, and then you can't be made for that neder. Peres Chanvani ze Allah enu Yachal offer. If he says the fruits of this particular fruit establishment, so he can't be made for that. Could just go to a different one. But if he has a special cheshbon with this particular fruit store, well then he can be made for it, because maybe he can they in this particular store it lets him buy on credit, which means that if he can't buy at this store, then she's not going to have any fruits and it will afflict her soul, so then he would be able to be made for that neder. Afflictions of the soul sounds like an interesting concept. Nidre inu nefesh, says the Gemara, hu de mefer shein bohen inu nefesh enu mefer. So one second, only vows that afflict the soul he can be made for, but if they don't afflict the soul, then he can't be made for them. We learn in the Brisa, Ben Ishli Ishto Ben Av Levito, the pasuk says between man and wife, between father and daughter, that a husband can be made for nedarim that are between them. So for example, if she says that anything I make you don't have access to, so he can be made for that neder. Amrei Sonu. So we see that it's not just things that afflict the soul, it's also things between them. So Amrei Alein V'Alein Mefer. So they say, okay, it can be made for both types, right? Whether it's affliction of the soul types or whether it's things between them. Miu, however, inu nefesh mefer le'olam. Things that afflict the soul, he can be mefer and they will be muffer forever. Avo, but ein bon inu nefesh, things that don't afflict the soul but are between them. K'di'isa trusei avya afaris. So then him being mefer that neder only lasts so long as they're married. But once they get divorced, so then the neder comes back into force. Okay, so it's not a permanent unnedering, a permanent annulment. Okay, skip like 2 lines or whatever. 1 second, but we're saying that that things that don't afflict the soul, things that are between them, when they get divorced, they come back. We learn in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Omer says Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Yofer Shemi Garshena V'tehei Asura Lo. That says Rabbi Yochanan that if she says Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri that if she says that he can't get benefit from any of the stuff that he makes. So I mean, you would think that things between them, right? Meaning something like that, she can't just do that because he's zocher to ma'aseh yodel. So you shouldn't have to be made for it. But versus Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, nonetheless, you should be made for it anyways, because if he's not made for it, so then while they're married, sure, he can continue to get benefit from stuff that he makes, but if they get divorced, then he won't be able to, because then it'll kick in. But rather recommends Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Yofer, let her be made for that neder, Shemi Garsheno, so that if they get divorced, V'tei Asurilo, right? If they get divorced, so then he won't be able to get any benefit from her stuff at that point, and then they wouldn't be able to get remarried because he would be also to get benefit from her stuff. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri suggests that he's just made for the neder, and then it will count forever. And therefore, if they want to get remarried, they would be able to. So we see that if he's made for the neder, and they get divorced, it was already mufer milichatchila, so therefore they would still be able to get remarried. So we see that that if he's made for Devarim Shebeinu Levena, it's forever, not just while they're married. So Amri Alein V'Alein Havya Hafare, we say yes, both are hafaras, right? If you're made for things that afflict the soul, or if you're made for things between them, Elo Nidrei Inu Nefesh made for Ben Atzmo Ben Lacherim, that Nedarim that afflict the soul, so he's able to be made for those Nedarim, whether they're still married, whether she's they get divorced and she marries some other guy. But if they don't, things that don't afflict the soul but are between them, made for la'acherim ve'eno. Made for la. Wait, what? Ein boin inu nefesh la'atzmo made for la'acherim eno mefer. He could be made for it as long as so things between them, he can be made for them for as long as they're married, and even if they get divorced, they can get remarried. But if they get divorced and then she marries somebody else, so then they can no longer get remarried, and at that point, the neder would kick in, and if she says that he can't get any benefit from her, so then he won't be able to get any benefit from her anymore at that point. And this is what we learn in our Mishnah. These are the nedarim that he is made for bein la'atzmo, bein la'acherim, whether for himself, whether for others, nedarim sheish b'in nefesh, things that, right, vows that have affliction of the soul. So those things he can be made for, whether there are implications for him, whether it's, whether kind of he's married to her, whether he's unable to marry her because she got divorced and she married somebody else. Affliction, things that afflict the soul, it can be made for always, but things that are between them would only be as long as, he is married or can marry her. Friends, that was Daf Ayin Tes of Masechta Nedarim. We talked about yanking chains, and ultimately we said that even if he's just yanking her chain, he can't be made for the Nedarim past the end of the day. And then we got to a new parak, and we talk about what are the Nedarim that a fellow could be made for his wife. We say things that afflict the soul, and we said things that are between them, so he can be made for it. As long as he's married to her, or potentially could be married to her. But if they get divorced and she marries somebody else, then the hafara kind of goes away. Friends, that was Daf Ayin Tes, Daf 79 of Masechta Nedarim. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.